Welcome into the Jackson Postcast Behind the Paywall, back on a Sunday, finally.
Yay.
Probably our first Sunday since like late July, sometime in the summer, even though it still technically feels like July. Maybe not quite that bad, but it's 90-something degrees. It's middle of September, man. I'm over it. I'm over the
Particularly
weather.
after we had a week or two of fall-esque temperatures.
They call that false fall, I believe,
Yeah.
on the social media GIFs and memes.
Also, is this supposed to get stormy tonight?
I did see your boy Joel put something on WBJ earlier with a big storm cell coming up from Gibson County, tracking down toward Trenton. I don't think it's going to make it to y'all, though.
Okay. Yeah, it's not like over my house, but in the last couple of minutes, I've seen some flashes to the north. I'm like face northeast, and like to the north, I'm seeing some flashes. But
Maybe
it's not
so.
like I don't have lightning bolts striking my umbrella over me or anything like that.
Not yet. That's good. Well, like when was it? Like back in the spring, you got stuck out in the storm. You had to walk through the house and go to the front
out
porch.
On the front porch, yeah.
Yeah, take cover.
Say hey to my
All
wife.
All of those things. So tonight we are covering the September 10th edition of the Jackson Post this past Thursday, but we're going to start out with something sort of current that will be in, I assume, next edition's paper that has to do with the death of Charlie Kirk and the vigil that was held downtown in Jackson. And before we get into this and even get into the rundown and all that, I texted you earlier, or maybe a couple of days ago. I was like, hey, I want to kind of talk a little bit about this Charlie Kirk thing. And even though we only stick to local stuff on here, this is a pretty big deal. This understated that, right? I think anytime you have someone killed in an act of political violence, these are things that we learn about in history, that we grew up learning about: presidential assassinations, assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., all of these huge moments. And I feel like moments like this in our day and time, because so many of them happen all the time, not necessarily political violence, but school shootings, public violence, mass shootings. And for me, at least, and I don't want to speak for anybody else, it's easy for me to shrug these things off. Even when Donald Trump was running for president a little bit over a year ago, someone shot him, and he came very close to being a victim of political violence. And that didn't even move the needle much for me. And honestly, it would have been the same thing if Vice President Harris, if there was intent made on her life. It honestly, personally, wouldn't have moved the needle for me in that moment, because I think I've become so desensitized to these types of things unless I know someone personally involved. The Covenant shooting affected me greatly because I had a friend whose daughter was killed. When UTC had the active shooter alert and my daughter texted me, I obviously had an emotional response to that. Outside of that, when these big things happen, I don't have a response. And I don't know what that is. It's just me being honest. I had no response to that. But what I did have a response to was sort of the fallout on social media after this Charlie Kirk thing happened. And I didn't know who Charlie Kirk was, honestly. And I think I texted you this. I was like, I thought he was just more of like a Ben Shapiro wannabe, or vice versa. I would get him mixed up. I didn't know what specific things he had said. I knew obviously what side of the aisle he was on because of just the conservative influencers. I sort of know the names. I didn't pay a lot of attention to him.
Yeah.
And so the fallout on social media, though, is what bothered me the most, I think. And I posted something the day it happened that I said, it seems like we're losing our humanity a little bit more each day. And that's what I wanted to mention when we're talking about this situation. Because there were a lot of people who were saying his death was being celebrated. I didn't see many things about celebrating his death on my timeline. I honestly didn't. I didn't see a lot of people celebrating. However, I did see people saying, yeah, but, or he said some really horrible things, or even something like, I forgot how it was put. If you want people to talk nice about you when you die, don't say horrible things when you're alive. Things like that. And we can get into the back and forth. For me personally, I think after someone has been murdered unjustly, and I would call this obviously an unjust murder to the nth degree, I think there are some things that for me, I would never say out loud immediately after that. And I'm trying to cast stones at anybody who did do that. I think people respond to things in different ways. I do know that there are people who were hurt by some things that he said, and I can't speak to that necessarily. But here's what bothered me the most. When I said that I think we're losing our humanity, is we're not seeing each other as fully formed people. For people who maybe lean conservative, I saw some of them saying, well, they did this, or this is the difference in the leftist violence and right. And they were grouping everybody under this one umbrella. And on the other side, I saw, well, this is what far right wing extremism does and blah, 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 blah. They're grouping everybody on one side. Then I saw quotes or comments that said something like, well, why don't we do this every time there's a school shooting? Or why don't, like, who cares? Like, who cares what political ideology the shooter had? None of that matters in the aftermath of someone being murdered at a public event who is speaking publicly.
Mm-hmm.
Like none of it. It doesn't matter what ideology the shooter had. Like, each side is trying to like form these things so they can make themselves feel better. Oh, it wasn't my guy. It wasn't my side. And when we do that, we lose the humanity in all of this. And I think we're already there. And I think this is why things like this keep happening, because we don't see people that we disagree with as fully formed human beings. We see them as a reflection for the things that we hate, and we see them as a way to personify the ideologies that we disagree with the most. And we need some type of person to sort of take that out on. And I think that's what we've done. Like, I think collectively we have done that. And we don't, because if you and I, for example, we've known each other for a long time. Even I think we knew each other. Well, this is a bad example. Let me back up and use another one. You mentioned a couple weeks ago when Ray Condre and I were both on the radio, and we had a great discussion. Face-to-face conversation. It was fine.
Yeah.
I like Ray. I like Ray in real life. Like, we've gotten along. We've had good conversation back and forth. Now, here's the difference. And I think this is where social media has really poisoned the way that the way people interact with each other. Sometimes I can see Ray's posts on social media and I get a different feeling, right? Because all it is words on a screen, and then I fill in the rest of the blanks, and I have ceased to see him as a fully formed, like, human, right? At that point. And I'm sure there are countless other people who can say the same thing about it. But we're at a really scary place here. If someone being gunned down in public aside, that should be the main thing. Every left-leaning person who's ever complained about gun violence should have been complaining about gun violence at that point, but I hardly saw anything about that. I just saw, a lot of the buts. And, the people on the right, and listen to me, I'm doing the same thing right now. I'm saying people on the left, people on the right, but from what I was seeing, you see a lot of these, well, that's just what Democrats do. Like the language is so charged and so dehumanizing that it makes it easy for us not just to hate people that we don't really know, but now for some people to literally take the lives of other people that they don't know. I'm assuming this shooter didn't know Charlie Kirk on a personal level. I'm assuming, I may be wrong, who knows, right? Hadn't all come out yet. But at some point, like, we are collectively poisoning ourselves, and it's just like these two turbines turning into each other that are just proliferating more hate and more hate and more hate. It's like this turbine of stuff. And I got off social media for a while, a few months ago, and I'm back on. But man, it is I guess it's always been toxic. I feel like it's probably worse now than it's ever been. This is just a horrible situation all the way around, regardless of what you think about Charlie Kirk as a person, the words that he said. And I think it is okay to acknowledge that the way that he said some things was hurtful to groups of people. I think that's okay to acknowledge. You can acknowledge that and be okay with that. But then you can also understand that nothing like that should ever happen to somebody simply for speaking their opinions in America. Like, this is what America is. Like, it is supposed to be a place where you do have freedom of speech. Now, there are consequences to that, but those consequences should never be murder or death. So that's where I've landed on it. The event itself was awful. I am more concerned about how this continues to go forward, though. Like, if we figure out some way to have conversations, honest conversations, and be vulnerable about those things that we think with each other, it's going to be a rough go. It's not going to get much better.
Yeah. Is that all that you had on it? Yeah. Well, and first off, just kind of speaking to your whole desensitizing that we seem to have toward other human beings, where we're more focused on what somebody says and their political beliefs more than and we feel the need to take action against those statements and those beliefs. This was, first off, the initial reaction that I got to it. I saw the actual video of without any editing and any pixelization or cuts or anything, and without getting into what it looked like, the gore and all that stuff. It was a not so gentle reminder that when JPD or the sheriff's office or whoever sends out a press release that we had a murder and somebody was shot. I mean, on Labor Day, I was with my dad and he was watching one of his old Western movies like Bonanza or Gunsmoke or something like that. And somebody got shot and they just put their hand over their chest or whatever. You know, there was no blood or anything that you could see on there. And I was like, I'm pretty sure, you know, I was joking around with my dad that day. I was like, I'm pretty sure that there's like actual blood that you can see when somebody gets shot because of what I saw Wednesday. Hopefully for the rest of my career, but at least for the foreseeable future, I'm going to take a little bit more. I'm going to take it a little bit more seriously when I just see a victim was shot because of what physically happens to that human body when a bullet enters it at however fast that bullet is traveling, and then whatever it does once it's inside the body, the damage that it does. That obviously can lead to death, but even if it doesn't, that's still a pretty traumatic thing for the human body to experience. That's the first thing. The second thing, just watching everybody react. And there were about 3 or 4 times Wednesday evening and early Thursday that I was going to post my own reaction to it. And for whatever reason, I didn't, because if I was going to do it 3 or 4 different times, it probably would have been 3 or 4 different things that I would have said. Mm-hmm. And I just didn't, because very little of what was posted from either side was de-escalating the situation. You know, in that moment, I didn't feel like dealing with being a part of the escalation of the situation within my circle. So, you know, and this is the first time publicly that I've said anything about it. And, you know, one side can say all they want about how the other side's responded, and the other side can say everything they want about how the other side's responded. In fact, before we recorded, I don't mind mentioning, I'm not going to name names, but last night when I went and covered the Vigil in downtown Jackson between City Hall and the courthouse, and I posted a couple of photos on my Facebook page of a friend who disagrees with Charlie and the people who were gathered at the Vigil, called them out for not doing it for the school shooting that happened the same day, I think at about the same time in Colorado. And I went ahead and clicked on that person's page just to kind of see where they were coming from. And they had a post up. I think they posted it Friday, maybe late Thursday, that said, if this had happened to, and they named a known figure, if this had happened to that person, these people would not be responding this way. Well, no duh, Sherlock. And if this had happened to that person, you'd be responding the way that they're responding, and they'd be responding the way you're responding. So, yes. And, you know, if this were to happen to, name any person from the left that this could have happened to, that it would have a similar effect on the people from the left. That reaction is totally logical and normal and acceptable. Hopefully, you said you didn't see that much celebration, but there was celebration. There was celebration of Kirk's death. Just like I saw some people, maybe not necessarily open posting on their own pages, but in the comments of some national media outlets, when the senator in Minnesota and her husband and dog were killed back in July. There were people from the right celebrating that and making light of that because, oh, she's a Democrat in a Democrat-run state, living in a Democrat-run city. That's what you get. Okay, that wasn't acceptable either. And so whether it's, you know, a teacher or an assistant dean in MTSU or whatever, or celebrating Charlie Kirk's death, or Jim Bob in the backwoods celebrating this lady's death 3 months earlier from the other side. None of it's okay. And that is my main issue to this whole thing, is that we have been desensitized to the value of a human life, to where we are more focused on, like what you said, we're more focused on their political beliefs and their stances and whether or not they agree with us. And if they don't agree with us, they're not as important. They're expendable. Let's go ahead and get them out of the way so that we have more people to shout from the rooftops what we believe, what we agree with. I mean, we can debate the whole Second Amendment. Are guns the problem? Are ARs the problem? And where I ultimately land is, and you may disagree with this, Gabe, and you know, I'd like to save that debate for another podcast, but whether It's a pocket knife on a subway in Charlotte, or a rifle on top of a building on a college campus in Utah, or a rock or a brick in a back alley on a skull. We no longer, as a society, value the life of a human as much as we used to the point that we don't care if someone that we don't value ourselves because of how they align with us, we don't value their life, their families' feelings, and everything having to do with them. So let's go ahead and get them out of the way, and this world will be a better place. And that is a dangerous mentality for our society to collectively have, because, I mean, there were a lot of people from the right who were saying, this is, we're getting closer to a civil war. And I don't necessarily, like, I see what they're saying, and I can see that logic, and it's scary, because it's one thing for 11 states to secede from the country and declare war on the country that they just seceded from and have two militaries fighting it out. It's a whole different thing for a bunch of citizens to choose either the red team or the blue team and take up whatever arms they can find and just start going after people they think wear the other jersey, even though it's a random Tuesday morning in name whatever metropolitan area that you want to name, and you just think you're just going to take out, people from the other side. And I do fear that we are headed that way, because, I mean, particularly in the last 10 or 15 years, it's felt like what we've always read about in American history when this country was going through civil rights in the 60s. But I always said in the back of my mind, at least we haven't gotten to 1968 where we're seeing RFK and MLK murdered. We've now gotten to that point. Maybe you remember because you're around history books. I don't know how the temperatures cooled after those murders. Maybe Woodstock is the answer. I don't know. But I don't know, whatever it took for the temperatures to cool down 60 years ago, we need to get to that point. And I don't know if 24-hour news cycles and social media are going to keep the temperatures high to the point that we'll never cool down, or if it's going to take something at a 9/11 level tragedy to get everybody to be like, all right, back to your corners. We got to calm down. This is getting too much. But and a party, a political ideology, an elected official, a candidate, a social influencer, none of these people are going to cure any of the problems that I spent the last 7 or 8 minutes discussing. None of that is going to be the cure. My total belief, and Gabe, you can disagree with me. Anybody listening to this can disagree with me, but Jesus Christ and kind of getting back to kind of living how we're taught to live by Him, and just having a mentality to where Jesus loved everybody and was willing to lay down His life for everybody because He had something to lay down His life for everyone. I can't offer you anything by laying down my life for you, but I need to love you in a similar manner to how Jesus did that. And if we can get back to that mentality, to where it's like, we may not agree, Gabe, you and I don't agree on much nationally and politically, but we know that we can disagree, but at the end of the discussion, we're probably still going to be friends, and we're still going to be able to hash it out, and nobody's going to get shot because of those beliefs, at least between me and you. And some people disagree with that notion for whatever reason. And if you do disagree with that notion, use that energy in some other part of the world where that's a little more accepted, because our country does not have that here, or shouldn't have that here.
We shouldn't. It did happen last week. I think the fundamental baseline for just everyone should be, like, when somebody gets shot and killed, whether they have kids or married or not. I mean, that obviously adds to it, right?
Right.
The baseline for decent humanity at that point should be to acknowledge, like, yeah, that's a bad thing, right? Like, and I know I'm understating that. That should be the baseline, and that's no longer the baseline, apparently. Like, we have become, like, so desensitized to it. I think the best post I saw, honestly, was from a friend of mine who is trans, and he said that a lot of Charlie Kirk's rhetoric was hurtful to him, right? He acknowledged that. And I get it. Like, I can understand that. And then in the same sentence, or the same post, it was like, but no one deserves that. Like, what happened to him. Like, that should not be the outcome of this, right? Like he was acknowledging both things. And I think that was the most human response that I saw from the entire 4 days, because it was vulnerable, it was honest, it was true, and it acknowledged like everything all at once, if that makes sense. That's where I landed. You were at the Vigil last night, and this is probably a good segue to that. So, how was that? There's a big crowd, I guess.
Yeah, about 600 people. That's the estimate in my story, and which I'm not really good at estimating people, so the range is probably somewhere between 300 and 3 million. But yeah, I mean, it was a pretty good crowd that filled up that area in front of the main entrance to City Hall, and then also had a bunch over in the courthouse lawn. And because Main Street was shut down on both ends of that block, had a bunch of people filling in the street there. And I mean, it was a very patriotic scene, a lot of red, white, and blue. The organizers somehow got a tent that on the front flap that hung down. You can see in the photos that I ran with the story, essentially the foundational basis of Kirk's events that he did on college campuses proved me wrong. That was printed on the tent, so I don't know if they got one of those from Turning Point USA or what happened. And then I didn't take a head count, but it was around 10 speakers. The organizer, Ryan Ferraro, I think is how you pronounce his last name. He hasn't lived in Jackson long, only for a couple of years. He grew up in New York. I know he moved here from, I think he said Arizona, maybe the Phoenix area. He said, I grew up apolitical. I didn't really have a stance. I didn't care. Then in 16, he started paying attention to politics, watching the election, and he had some beliefs going into that, and where he just kind of felt like both of the main candidates and everybody connected to him, President Trump and Hillary Clinton, he felt like they were both for the same side, even though one was a Republican, one was a Democrat. And then he started seeing after Trump's election, he just started seeing a lot of the blatant and what he felt was too harsh negativity toward Trump and his policies. He just felt like it crossed the line into unfair coverage from a lot of the mainstream media. And that kind of made him start to listening to conservative people like Rush Limbaugh and Charlie Kirk, so that he could kind of balance out what he was hearing from a lot of the mainstream media. So that's how he became familiar with Charlie Kirk and became a fan of him. So because of he had followed him for nearly a decade now, he felt the need. He said, I'm living in Jackson. I know there's a lot of people here that support his ideologies. So I'm just thinking, let's just set something up to just let some people who agree with me just kind of gather and just kind of process this together. And he said, I didn't expect this many people to show up. I think he would have been, if 50 people had showed up, he probably would have counted that as a win. I didn't ask him that question, so I may be overshooting that mark or undershooting it. I don't know. That was just kind of what I gathered from the way he said it. But he spoke. He's neighbors with Michael Roby, the former director of Area Relief Ministries. I think Michael kind of helped him set it up. State Representative Chris Todd, State Senator Ed Jackson, they both spoke. Madison County Mayor A.J. Massey spoke, and I'll give Mayor Massey some props. He and I have not always agreed publicly. We've had some public disagreements during his time on the school board. I don't know if we've had any public disagreements since he's been mayor, but we've not always gotten along during his time on school board or as mayor. If however long he works in public service and is in positions to give speeches, he is going to have to work hard to surpass what he did last night at the Vigil. He spoke from his heart. He got a little emotional there for a minute when he kind of related, Charlie was had a young wife and 2 young kids. If you've never heard Mayor Massey talk about the fact that he's got a wife and 2 sons, you've never heard him talk, because he brings them up all the time in public. I've almost made that a bingo square in county commission meetings. But his first statement was, I thought about Charlie today while I was at the ballpark watching my sons play, and I thought about the fact that Charlie will never get to experience that. And it made me mad. And he just continued to speak from the heart there for a little while, and then read a few verses from 2 Timothy, which is, I think it's what most scholars believe is Paul's last letter before he dies. And he's just kind of laying out a few last words. Hey, here's some important things to know before I go, Timothy. And it's the verses leading up to that famous verse. I've run the race, I fought a good fight, and I'm going to get my reward now. And So there was that. Trying to think. Ray Condre spoke, and what he said was memorable too. I identify pretty well with what he said. He said, he's old. He's a little older than me and you. We're in our mid-40s. Elvis was dead, allegedly, before we were born in the early 80s. He said, I was alive and remember when Elvis died and how everybody responded to that. And I never could figure out, and even celebrity deaths since then, I've never been able to figure out how you could be so emotional when someone you've never met dies. He said, but as of Wednesday, I can identify with that because he obviously was a big fan of Charlie Kirk. He posted a video on the Madison County Constitutional Republican Party Facebook page within an hour after President Trump broke the news that Kirk had passed, and you could tell then this death was hitting him pretty hard. And then everybody just made proclamations that were similar to what his wife said the night before, that this movement did not die on Wednesday under a tent at Utah Valley State College. If anything, it's going to grow. And everyone who spoke and a lot of people who clapped and cheered at that event sounded like in the moment they're ready to do what they got to do to continue that movement. And there was some statements that kind of crossed the line into being confrontational and accusatory to the other side of the aisle. And personally, I didn't write about it in my story because it was touted as a vigil. My thinking is a vigil is a celebration and recognition of a legacy and remembrance and celebration of a life, not a declaration of war. And I'm not saying anybody declared war last night, but it was there were a few statements like I said, okay, we could have done without that, but whatever. Save that for your Facebook page. But other than that, it was a good event, and did what it had to do, and it allowed about 1% of the population of Jackson to hopefully properly deal with this loss.
Couple things before we move into the local stories there.
Yeah.
I think that rhetoric is going, like the way that we interact with each other and the things that we say online and in person moving forward is going to determine really how this goes. I think. I don't have a lot of high expectations for that, honestly. I mean, speaking frankly.
Yeah.
But that's going to determine the way this goes. And if we keep grouping people under these broad labels and dehumanizing them in that regard, then it's going to keep going this way. And the second thing is too, like I think, and people have the right to celebrate whoever they want to celebrate, obviously, right? That's the freedom. I think that it does, when we choose to publicly celebrate people notice that.
Right.
I think that's what I'll say. Celebrity deaths don't move me, but I remember I wrote a column about Aaron Rodgers whenever he lied about his vaccination in 2021. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
And I don't know Aaron Rodgers. I love him as a football player because he connects to a specific part of my life as a football player. I don't know him as a fully formed human. Honestly, most of the stuff that I've heard him say, he and I probably wouldn't get along. I mean, we have very different ideals, I think, about certain things.
Right.
And then we have some things in common, but I love to watch him play football. And so I wrote this column about basically give him a little bit of grace on this immunization thing or whatever. And there was someone who I would consider a friend. We agree on everything. And she commented, she lambasted me on the comments. Her father had passed away from COVID not too long before that. And so her view of Aaron Rodgers was he was essentially the worst type of person, right? He misled, in her mind, he misled people and he thought it's okay not to be and all these things. And so that was her singular view. And I was sort of trying to give him a pass, even though she and I think the same way on a lot of things, but that thing like that really, and I understood it from her perspective. So I do think people notice who people celebrate. I think that's important to keep in mind. God forbid anything like this happens again moving forward.
Right.
So here's the rundown. But that was good conversation. I'm glad that we did talk about that. Local stories in the September 11th edition, the Kellanova TCAT partnership. We're going to get finally a Jackson Plaza update. I'm interested in this. This thing has been just sitting there over there on Old Hickory for a long time now.
Well, it's still just sitting there for the time being, but at least there's discussion.
At least we're talking about it.
Yeah.
I'd forgotten it was even there. All right. And then the charter school review appeal hearing at Central Office 2 Fridays ago. We'll get through that. And then just a little bit of a high school football roundup. We've had 3 weeks now. Is it 3 or 4 weeks?
4 weeks.
4 weeks.
We are almost halfway through the regular season, Gabe.
And it's still 90 degrees outside. Fine. All right, so let's get into this. Let's get into the Kellanova TCAT partnership. I did not even know about Kellanova until I read the article. I've known about TCAT, and I know that there's a huge push in Tennessee, and Governor Lee has been like very vocal about this since he's been in office, right? About these sort of preparing graduates for the workforce. TCAT is a huge part of that as a post-secondary option. When I was in Haywood County, Governor Lee came to Haywood High School. We had a very robust CTE program there. This was after Louisville City was announced. There's a TCAT being built on that campus, I believe, if it's not already finished. So let's talk about this Kellanova TCAT partnership. What's the purpose of it? How are they helping Kellanova? Also, I read a little bit. It seems like there's a lot of like, not transitioning, but the way that like assembly jobs are done now, it's a lot of automated stuff, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, tell us a little about that.
Yeah, and I was actually able to talk to my daughter about this week because we're still figuring out what to do with her as far as her next step. She graduated high school back in May, and she's still figuring out. She's taking some online classes at Jackson State while she figures out her next steps. And, and I was telling her, because I had to take her to campus for some stuff this week. And as we're driving by the factories that are on Effie Wright Drive on the way to Jackson State, and I'm telling her, I said, when you look at that factory, I said, what do you think goes on in there? Like, what do you think it looks like and stuff? And she said, it's probably dark and dirty and grimy and hot or cold, depending on what time of the year it is and stuff like that. And I said, no, it's actually pretty bright in there and it's climate controlled. Yeah, we do have some places around here where it's people on assembly lines doing the same action over and over for 8 hours a day because the technology hasn't gotten into that industry to automate the work there. But a lot of the places, like at Toyota and now Kellanova, formerly known as Kellogg's, formerly known as Procter & Gamble, where Pringles and saltine crackers and all that stuff are made, a lot of it's automated now. With machines who are doing the bulk of the work, now the jobs at those places now are not doing the actual work of producing this stuff, but programming and doing maintenance and running the machines that do the work. And so, Kellanova has gone through that transition. And as they went through that transition, they came out on the other side of it, a few years ago. They noticed we need more people able to do these jobs. And so, 4 years ago, they entered into a partnership with TCAT, mainly in TCAT Jackson, but it also includes, I think they said 11 total TCAT locations, most of them within about an hour's drive of Jackson. I know TCAT Northwest, which I think is Ripley or New Bern, is one of them. Counts is one of them. One over in Middle Tennessee, Hohenwald, maybe?
Hohenwald, yes, Central.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, is involved too. And Hohenwald is like 30 minutes on the other side of the Tennessee River over in Lewis County. So they're all involved where there is a specific, about a 16-month training program for people to go through at TCAT. And once they complete this training, they are certified to work with the machines Kellanova. If they're hired at Kellanova, there is 4 more weeks of more direct training with their machines and their objectives, what they're doing. And also, once they've gone through that training, and I didn't really cover this in the story, but I think maybe it got a mention. But once you go through the training at TCAT, if you get a job at Kellanova, there's 2 different paths you could go down. Either working on the electrical side or on the maintenance programming, working with the actual machine side. And some people go the electrical route because they're more interested in that kind of thing. And some people go the robot route because they're more interested in that side of thing. Pretty much they let them choose most of the time. I guess maybe if they really need electricians, they say, hey, can you come over this way even though you'd rather go over here? But for the most part, choose which way you want to go because we know you're going to thrive there. Right. But either way, they're getting the same. The first 16 out of 17 months, they're getting the same training either way. Now, and I asked this toward the end, and Dr. Rainey, the president at TCAT Jackson, she's been there for about a year. I talked to her about this, and I said, okay, so what if the program's wrapping up and you got 12 people who are finishing the training, going to graduate, but there's only 7 spots available at Kellanova. What do the other 5 do? Do they wait for positions to open up? She said, no, fortunately, we've got a lot of good industrial partnerships throughout the region, not just in Jackson, but, Dyersburg, Union City, Martin, other town, Bolivar, where there are other factories. And she said, this training, while we may have a partnership with Kellanova for this training also works for those machines. It trains you to work with the machines. It doesn't train you to create the product. So yes, you may get a job where the machine that you're working with creates Pringles chips. But if for some reason you don't get that job where you're working with the machine creating Pringles chips, that training will also help you work with a machine that's creating engines for Toyota vehicles. So it's not just a food directed program. And it seems to be working for both TCAT and Kellanova. And according to Dr. Rainey, it's working for other industry too. And I'm starting to hear that running water noise again. So if I freeze up in a minute, I'll log back in as soon as I can.
Wow, I wonder what that is. Good night. It's like a ghost just up in your phone. TCAT's got a huge footprint in West Tennessee, and they do really good work. So hats off to them, and good for Kellanova for partnering with it. I didn't realize Kellanova what UC Procter & Gamble, so obviously I have heard of it, just not in its new iteration. All right, Jackson Plaza, way back in, what was it, 22, right?
Yep, right after
Mayor
the post started.
Conger, right after the post, yes, he decided, or maybe not he, I guess the city council had to vote on this, I'm assuming.
No, he did it.
No? Oh, he did it. Okay, so this is all him.
Now, I think he announced the plans,
by
and
the
I
way?
think they had to vote on whether or not to actually spend the money. I think that's how it worked. But before they spent, everybody knew what his plans were because he kind of released his press release on it.
And I wrote, this was actually my first op-ed for the Post, because you wrote one that was sort of like different than mine. And I was like, hey, this is the time to take a big shot. Why not? Things have changed since then. It's been 3 years. So I think back then in 2022, Blue Oil City was still rolling on schedule. We thought we were going to have a lot of this coming. That's slowed down. That's changed a little bit. So I don't feel like that momentum is as strong as it was 3 years ago. I think we're completely out of COVID money at this point. So that, that's not there. And I honestly thought something would have happened with this by now. The only, I guess, consistent place that I'm staying here, like 3 years later, is, okay, what was plan B then? Because obviously that was just sitting there like it is sitting there now.
Right.
But if we didn't do something, and I still think it was good to be proactive and snatch that up and then make a plan for it. Because if you didn't, what's the other option? Like, nobody's coming in and grabbing that. And that whole part of town, honestly, if you think about Jackson, downtown's growing. Out north has been growing forever. That middle section is rotting out.
East Jackson's growing with the stadium at JCM.
East Jackson's growing, right? So, but the middle part of the city is kind of rotting from that part, and the mall is what it is, and so the plaza is right over there. This piece had some. Who was it? People? I shouldn't say people. Like
JLL.
Who was this group? JLL. Yeah. And so what came of that? Was there anything new? Like, I know there are companies out there that sort of give these like plans. Hey, this is what could happen if somebody invests. Was that what this was essentially?
Yeah, essentially. Because they're still trying to figure out what they want to do with it, and everything that I've been hearing behind closed doors, and then, it's nothing that I would go to print with, but I guess I'm willing to go to podcast with it. Everything that I've been hearing behind the scenes is, okay, it sounds like the city doesn't want to get into the business of property development themselves and stuff. So probably what they're going to do is, once they have all these soil studies and all these different studies done about the plot of land and the surrounding areas, then they're going to demolish it, resod it, and pretty much have a nice green space out there that's up for sale, and then let a private developer come in and do whatever they feel like they can do to make good on their investment. Because they think it'd be better to spend the money to go ahead and demolish everything and ask for more money for the land than to decrease the asking price and have the developers be the ones to demolish it, because then they're trusting the developers to actually demolish it and not get buyer's remorse on it, not do anything with it, like the company in Memphis that bought the YMCA building. And, here we are 5, 6 years later, and it's just sitting there deteriorating. So they don't want to run into that on a larger scale with this area. And so I assume Mayor Conger and his staff contacted JLL, reached out to them and said, hey, would y'all do research on what the potential is there, what could work? And my assumption is that Mayor Conger either told them what he'd like to do originally when he entered into this agreement on behalf of the city, or they read the Jackson Post.
Maybe both.
But they did come back with talking about an entertainment district, putting an entertainment district there, and putting an arena there, a larger arena than what we currently have with the Carl Perkins Civic Center, a more state of the art arena than we have with the Carl Perkins Civic Center or Omen Arena. One that could support maybe not a Taylor Swift tour stop, but bigger acts and not.
You mean Taylor's not coming to Jackson?
Well, that joke was made when her name was specifically made, and this was like the week after she got engaged, so they were talking about trying to host her wedding in Jackson or something like that.
Wow. Well,
I don't think
maybe if we build it, she will come. If we build it big enough.
Yeah, I think she's going to need more than a 10,000 seat arena for her wedding. But
that the shopping center across the street from that, it ain't in great shape either. Los Portales, I think, is the only running business right now over there. So maybe just do a whole reclamation of that entire space. Yeah. Reroute Old Hickory, right? Or whatever that, reroute Old Hickory. Mm-hmm. Just make that a huge convention center. There it is. Problem solved.
There was discussion. I mean, nothing mentioned about what to actually do with the mall and that shopping center, but they did say it would be good to address that, because you can't just have this really nice state-of-the-art arena a full mile and a half away from the interstate, and then what's currently between the interstate and that spot, they're hiding it from the interstate.
Yeah.
So at least make a gateway. And they kept talking from the bypass. They never talked about Highland. So they were talking about making a nice entertainment district type, almost a pathway down the bypass to Old Hickory, and then I guess that entertainment district takes a left, and boom, you wind up at what is now Service Merchandise, what will eventually be known as Scott Conger Arena or whatever, and Convention Center.
Sounds like a plan, from Conger Park to Conger Arena.
But I mean, and they had some nice plans on there. I mean, they had the arena, they had some retail and restaurants, and even a grocery store on the premises there. They had a park, and they were talking about, some people had talked about, let's put an amphitheater there. Well, one, nobody brought up during that Jackson already has an amphitheater, but I think maybe they were talking about a bigger amphitheater, like maybe amphitheaters that have been in Nashville or Birmingham or whatever. Yeah, I mean, maybe.
We do have an amphitheater, but it's not like it's like the Baconator Jr. at Wendy's, right? Okay. It's like, it's not like the actual Baconator. It's its son. So the amp is like a real amphitheater's kid.
So on Friday night, you go to the amp, but then on Saturday night, when Taylor Swift comes in to have her wedding, you go to this amphitheater.
Ascend. Yeah, that's right. Yes.
Okay.
That's what you do. Yep.
All right. So, they did bring that up. And so they were potentially talking about using that green space as to also double as an amphitheater type situation. But, even before they got to the plans, they talked about when they were talking to different companies, like promotion companies that bring concerts and artists and stuff like that, or companies that could potentially put their location on this premises or somewhere between the interstate and Service Merchandise. They said, generally, pretty much everybody said Jackson's a great location, right between Memphis and Nashville, right on the interstate. They are aware. A lot of the people that they talk to are aware of the growth that's supposed to happen here in the next few years once Blue Oval City gets totally off and running, and Great Wolf Lodge and everything is supposed to be going on. But there was a certain percentage of them, I'd say probably, I mean, they didn't give any numbers, but just kind of what I was thinking, maybe somewhere between 20 and 30% of the people be like, but we've heard some not great things about Jackson, so we're kind of hesitant to really pursue anything there. Now, is it crime? Is it governmental situations that they don't want to have to deal with whatever they perceive would be negative about working with permits and restrictions and stuff like that? I don't know. They didn't really get into that. They just said we've heard some things about Jackson that kind of give us pause So we're not all in, but we'd be willing to listen if there was something to discuss. So it's got potential, but nothing is off the table, but nothing is definitely on the table yet either.
Kind of sounds like where we were
3 years ago, pretty much.
Yeah. So, okay. Awesome. All right. Check that one off. Speaking of time being a flat circle, there was another appeal.
Yeah.
I get appeal review.
Hearing.
We had one of these 2 years ago as well, hearing
Yeah.
something like that. When I forgot what it was called. It was the Hillsdale affiliated. What was that? Ace, right? They got approved by the state board, and then we're like, no, we're just kidding. We don't want to come anyway.
When they brought their principal who had just been hired at another school
in South Carolina.
In South Carolina.
So crazy. But Jackson Museum School, and I hate to lead into this because that's such a poor reflection on JMS, and I do not mean for that to be.
No, that's it. I mean,
but
during the interviews, I made a lot of references to their predecessor. So if anyone with Jackson Museum School is listening or watching this, they know that any references to them are not necessarily lumping them in with ACE. So carry on.
Right. And I don't hate JMS, honestly. They were denied. JMS was also denied twice by our local school board. And so as per state law, it gets kicked to a government appointed, a Bill Lee appointed review committee to hear arguments from both sides. So
9 members,
you were there.
3 in each Grand Division, none of which live in Madison County. They're all Shelby County people.
That's right. And they're making a lot of money too, apparently. So what was said? I know Jackson Museum School had 7 or 8 speakers.
They both had 10.
Madison County school system. They both had 10. Okay, so they both had 10. So what was the gist of each side? Were they pretty much lockstep with each other, like the 10 members on one side, sort of repeating the same things over and over? So maybe give us the gist of what each side said, like for and against.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much the people who. Well, first off, it was a 2.5 hour hearing. The first 30 minutes was 15 minutes for the JMCSS charter review team to kind of make their case for why they recommended rejecting. And then 15 minutes for Jackson Museum School, JMS, from here on out to essentially make their case to come to Madison County and what they'll bring to the educational table of the county. Then after that, Tess Stovall, the executive director of the Charter Commission, she had questions for both sides where there were like some gaps in some of the cases. So she asked them, how did you come to this conclusion? Or how are you going to fund this if there's a question of how you're going to fund it this way, or if you don't get this grant or whatever. A lot of the information that was given is pretty similar to what was given in April and July at both of the work sessions before the board voted to deny. There were, according to Dr. Jean Little, the director for JMS, there were some inaccuracies allegedly in the review team's assessment, and she kept landing on, but in the 3 major areas that are required for us to meet or exceed expectations, we did that. So she never just came right out and said this, but the implication that I perceived was they're grabbing at straws to say we should be denied. So, and then we had about an hour of comments, and to both sides' credit, very few employees were part of those who commented. JMS at one of the work sessions, I think the one in April, because I wasn't able to be at the one in July. I was out of town that week. Pretty much everyone who spoke on behalf of JMS in April were board members, which, okay, you expect them to say that stuff. At the same time, it'd be like, okay, it'd be a stronger case if somebody who's not planning to be on your board would be the one to make the case. They got that this time around. And it was from parents who were familiar with the museum school model, parents who said that they have listened to Dr. elevator pitch and maybe the extended presentation, and they were bought in with it. A lot of them were homeschool parents that are the reason why they're homeschool is they don't like the options and opportunities that JMCSS offers, but they like what JMS offers. So they're asking for that to be offered in the county. So that took about an hour. And then there was a final pitch, like a closing argument from each side. First one from JMS, from Dr. Little, and then Dr. Marlon King was the one who gave the closing argument for JMCSS. And he repeated what he said. I can't remember if it was at the work session or at the school board meeting in July, But he repeated what he put out there 3 months ago or 2 months ago, which was, I'm willing to work with him. But if we do, it's going to be a school and a school situation like we've got with Star Academy at North Parkway. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. North Parkway.
Or Parkway Middle. And so we're willing to work with you that way. I was sitting on the JMS side. It was kind of like a wedding. There was a JMS side and JMCSS side. And there were some audible reactions to that proposal from Dr. King, from people who were sitting around me. And that sounded like they were not in favor of that. Dr. Little said afterwards, she said, Dr. King has never mentioned this to me. He's never sent me an email. He's never called. He's never texted. I've heard him mention this twice, and it was in meetings in this room to other people besides me. She said, so I can't really react until I have that conversation with him. But for now, we're still pursuing this either way. So
I think that makes sense on both sides. I mean, I think it makes sense for Dr. King to, if he likes the idea and there are families that want that option, then yes, bring them under the umbrella of our district and put them in the school and then let's roll. But then also I completely understand, JMS as well, because like this is their thing and they want the autonomy over that. So that's understandable.
Yeah.
How long will this take for this review committee to make their decision?
I mean, they've got a meeting, I think, on October 16th in Nashville, and it'll be similar to the one that happened in Nashville two years ago, where each side can either send in a 1-page memo to make their case, or they can actually send someone to Nashville to essentially talk for 2 minutes. But according to the rules of the commission, the commission members won't be able to ask any questions. There won't be any conversation between them. It'll just be among them based on Stovall's recommendation to the commission. And they'll be deciding on this and 5 other applications because they're having similar hearings in 5 other counties throughout the state. And they're going to decide on all 6 that day.
It'll be interesting to see how this comes out. And I think it'll be very telling as well, because at least from my view from the outside, JMS did much better on their rubric and evaluation than ACE did. Like scored higher, were meeting more of the standards that were required, and they still got denied. Of course, they got approved by the state charter board. It'll be interesting to see what happens in JMS, because if they get approved, it would be surprising because their rubric or their score against the rubric was better than ACE, and ACE got approved. So it would stand to reason that now if they don't get approved, well, then that's a whole different conversation.
Yeah.
Of why ACE may have gotten approved.
Yeah, because we're going to be discussing, okay, should Gene Little have been good buddies with Governor Lee to the point that Governor Lee would be willing to sit on the stage with her while she talked about how stupid public school teachers are.
Mm-hmm. Which she wouldn't, because she was one at one time. Yeah, that'll be interesting. All right, finishing up with something that everybody loves. Everybody in America can agree on this, I think. Football is the national pastime. Can we agree on this at this point?
If my dad were listening to this podcast, which he don't, he would not agree with that.
Okay, but we just got to be honest. Did you know, according to Colin Cowherd, 96 out of the top 100 most watched shows last year were football games? Now, I know streaming has a lot to do with that, and I know that sports is the only appointment television now at this point, so you're going to tune in that moment to watch, right?
I'm trying to think of what the other 4 would be. What were the other 4?
I know, right? Maybe some Academy Award. He didn't say. I would assume maybe like an award show or some type of like something that was live that you had to watch in that moment that you couldn't stream.
Maybe a presidential debate.
No.
Are we talking 24?
Yeah, I bet so. No, you're right. That's probably what it was. The debate. Yep, the debates.
Well, there's only one.
So.
Well, there's a vice presidential debate too.
Yeah.
People don't watch award shows anymore. Did any show end? Was there like any shows like big grand season finale? Did anybody die on The Walking Dead in a graphic manner?
Walking Dead ain't even around anymore, is it?
Okay. I'm still saying crunk. I don't know. Okay, leave me alone.
That's a good point. You're still wearing an Atlanta Braves World Series shirt too.
Yeah. This is 21.
Okay. Well, yeah. Okay. It's not the 95 one. That's good.
Right. Anyways.
But anyway, football national the reason I brought that up is because we're doing our high school football roundup. Mm-hmm. Something everybody can agree on. Everybody can agree that high school football is fun. College football is great. Speaking of both of those, Westview alum Ty Simpson had a big game yesterday, didn't he? Or Saturday?
He's had 2 big games. Right? He's like 95 out of 100 completion percentage in the last 2 games, and thrown like 47 touchdowns in those last 2 games.
Wow. Those are Tecmo Bowl numbers.
I was going to say those numbers are probably exaggerated, but y'all get the point. Roll Tide.
So, Roll Tide. No, I can't believe I said that. Man, Tennessee, that game was incredible yesterday, which we won't get into all that. But
I missed the end at the
what
Vigil.
a game. Man, I was, Laura and I went out in Pennsylvania last night, and so we were at this little restaurant, and so I made, there was the Big Ten multi-view, 4 Big Ten games going on. I was like, buddy, can you please just turn it to the Tennessee-Georgia game? And he did, kindly enough. So that was nice of him. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so high school football roundup. The big story in the September 11th edition of the Jackson Post. Sorry.
There's no way a restaurant in Jackson would have turned it to a Penn State game. But go ahead.
I know. You're right. And he did. He was nice. The big story, the big sports story in the September 11th edition was the USJ TCA game. And you were there, right? It ended at a very close game. That is a rivalry. But then you also, in the article, you commented on sort of the post-game sportsmanship. So kind of, you can talk about the game a little bit and then maybe talk about that too, because it'd be nice to end this episode on a positive note.
I'll be honest with you. At one point toward the end of that game between TCA and USJ, I thought about this podcast because you had asked me 2 or 3 weeks into the season, who are disappointments, who are pleasant surprises. And I said, we could potentially be seeing a 9-0 versus 9-0 matchup on Halloween night between USJ and Jackson Christian for the region championship. Well, that would require both of them to beat TCA because TCA is in the same region. And 55 seconds left, TCA scores and then kicks the PAT to go up 21-20. And USJ, except for one play, one big pass play, did not move the ball well at all on that series. They were down to 4th and long on their side of the 50-yard line with 30 seconds to go. And during the timeout before that play, I was like, man, this is going to make me look stupid. For anyone who watched that. But then they had the long pass play. Jacob Snyder with the long reception from their quarterback, Creech, and then Cohen Neighbors with the 23-yard field goal to get with 2.8 seconds left to give USJ a 23-21 victory. It kept me from looking stupid for one more week. Although Southside made me look stupid this past week when they throttled or had the nice little comeback win over South Gibson this past week.
Wow. I didn't know that. I didn't realize that.
They were down 10-0 in the first half and came back and won.
One thing about kickers in high school, that is such, if you have if one team has a good kicker, I'm not saying TCA doesn't have a good kicker. I'm just saying, generally speaking, in high school football, if one team has a really good kicker and the other team doesn't, that could be a huge difference in a game.
Oh, yeah.
And because, kicking skill at the high school level is some teams just don't have it, right? And it's a specialized skill, really, that you've got to develop over time.
When I was at the Sun still as a sports editor, we had, we were covering a good chunk of rural West Tennessee. I think 13 out of 20 counties. We had a string there of 5 or 6 straight years where the kicker of the year in football came from Lexington, which is not a school that you would think of that would have good kickers, except they got a decent soccer program. And usually a school with a decent boys soccer program is going to have a decent kicker because the football coach will go to the soccer coach and be like, hey, I'm not going to, if he doesn't want to play football, I'm not going to put him out, on the line or anything like that. I just want him to kick. And a lot of the times that's how they get their kickers. But also the Lexington guys, every year, whoever the kicker is, and it's usually the same kicker for 2 or 3 years, will go to the Colquitt's Kicking Academy.
Colquitt.
And is it just one of them? I thought it was a whole family of them.
It's both. There's Britton and Dustin. Yeah, both.
Okay.
2 brothers.
Okay. And so they were getting this training, and whereas most kickers in rural West Tennessee, are going to be 45 out of 50 in PATs, but only 2 out of 5 in field goals. The Lexington kickers oftentimes are going to be 13 for 15, 16 for 19, and they're going to have a long of 45, 47 yards, whereas everybody else's long is going to be 25 yards. But Lexington is always known for its big offensive line and its quality rushing attack and strong defense. But and all of that is typically true for Lexington, particularly when Brian Hollingsworth was their coach. But what got lost in all that was, they got pretty good special teams too. And that's a third of the game. It may only be about 10 plays of the game, But that's a lot more times than not. That's 10 important plays of the game, and that gave them an advantage that not a lot of people understood. So yeah, that was me talking a lot longer about
Yeah,
that than
it
what I
pays off.
planned on.
It's a big deal, and it obviously was the difference in the USJ game. I mean, USJ won that on a kick, right, on a
Yeah.
field goal to end the game. The other game that week, I believe, Northside Southside, right?
Yeah.
That was the same night.
Mm-hmm. And Northside had
Yeah,
a
and I
good
think
showing,
Northside,
particularly defensively that night.
yeah, Northside's a good team, and so we'll talk about, I guess, last Friday's games next week in that roundup.
Yeah,
So,
they had
one more thing about the USJ.
I was just going to say, I mean, Lexington kind of got the better of them this week, but they'll try to bounce back from that and move on from that one.
Yeah. Real quick, tell us the USJ TCA game after the game, sort of all the camaraderie that was going on the field afterwards between the players and the coaches.
Yeah, so I'm interviewing Derek Pritchard, USJ's head coach, after the game. And as we're talking, right after he gets done with his post-game huddle with the team, we're kind of talking on the field where we can look down and watch TCA's post-game huddle. Coach Bowling is still talking with them while we're doing the interview. He said, "Hey, when they break up their huddle, I want to run down there and say, and just kind of give respect to TCA's quarterback Owen Atwood and their running back / linebacker Hank Miller. Miller's been their defensive leader for the last 3 years, and now he's having a bigger role on offense because they needed a running back. So he's been one of their workhorses on both sides of the ball now. So go down there, finish the interview with Coach Pritchard, talk to Coach Bolin. While I'm talking to Coach Bolin, Miller's still down there. And then some USJ kids come up in their white jerseys and they're talking and I'm sitting there talking to Bolin. I kind of get my phone and I'm holding it like I'm holding it right now while talking to you and get a picture of these kids just kind of sitting there talking. And I knew one of the players' mothers, Facebook friends with her, so I sent it to her. I said, "Hey, I thought maybe you might appreciate this. I'm probably going to write about it too." And she told me, she said at least one of the kids on the other team was their neighbor. And so they've grown up together. They're good friends. They've just gone to different schools. So they were glad to just kind of say hey for a minute once the competition was over. And I just wanted to point out that, this year if there was any extracurricular back and forth leading up to the game this year, I never heard about it. That's not been the case some years. Which, by the way, my dog Brian, he's got a lot to say right now. Apparently, my apologies, but there have been some times, and it's not just TCA USJ. I mean, a couple of years ago, JCM and Northside and Southside, Northside, and other years have just been downright nasty to each other, leading up to a game. To the point that when we get to the game, we're like, okay, what's going to happen here before this game's over, or even after this game's over? But I just wanted to highlight with Column, there was none of that here. It was just a great game and great sportsmanship among the guys after it was over. And that's what you really want to see out of anybody in athletics, but particularly at the high school level where we are still trying to mold these young men and women in other sports into quality, productive citizens 5, 10, 20 years down the road.
For sure. Well, all right, buddy. Thanks a lot. That was a good one. Got a lot in. We'll be back same time next week.
Maybe.
See y'all then.
All right. See you.
Maybe.